Welcome back. In this video, we will look at the most common type of Kubernetes service called ClusterIP. Now, ClusterIP is the default type. So if we don't specify any type, this will be used. In ClusterIP, our endpoint, our service, will only be accessible from within the cluster, not from the outside world. ClusterIP is not used to route traffic from the outside world, only traffic within the cluster. So anything that's happening within a cluster can be routed through ClusterIP. Now, the service describes the different rules and configurations that are used to access our different pods, our different deployment resources. So if we go ahead and we check everything that we have within our Kubernetes example namespace, we can see that I have redeployed the service. Now we have ClusterIP running. We have a ClusterIP endpoint. Now this is the endpoint, the IP address that's accessible within the cluster only. And then we have here the port over which it's accessible. Now we have our different resources that I described before. We can go ahead and we say kubectl get endpoints. And we want to say in our example namespace. Now this provides us all the endpoints that our service is connected to. So our node application service is connected to these following endpoints. So when we say kubectl get pods -o right in namespace example, we can see that here are the IP addresses for our two different pods. Now those are the endpoints for our different pods. And these are the endpoints that the service is connected to. This is how the service knows which pods to connect to. The pods have endpoints, their own internal IP address, and the service can discover these endpoints. Now, the endpoints, the application is running on port 8080. That's why you see here port 8080, but the service itself is accessible through port 3000. So how is that actually configured? And how does the service actually discover these endpoints? Let's take a look at our service manifest. This is the manifest that's used to deploy the service. So as you can see here, it's of type service. Here's a name for it, node application. I could call this anything. It doesn't have to be the same as within the deployment. They don't have to be called the same. So I specified the type ClusterIP. Remember, if I do not specify this type, it will still be ClusterIP. So I have ClusterIP defined, and then I have ports. Now within ports, the only port that really has to be specified is the port. Additionally, I have a target port. I have the type of protocol I want to use, and the name. In this case, I'm using HTTP. You could also name it something else, such as web. It's also really common to be used as a name. Now, here's the important part. It's a selector. Run node application. If you've watched the previous video, we've already seen that there's a match label and a label for our template called run node application. And through the selector, run node application, our service knows which pods to connect to independent of the endpoints. We do not have to know the specific endpoints for our pod to tell our service how to connect to those endpoints. We only have to have the selector in this case in place. Now, let's take a look at the ports. I've specified I want to access this service and the deployments that are connected to the service through port 3000. However, the target port, that's the port that the service is supposed to target, is port 8080 because that's where my application runs. That's the container port. So let's draw this to make this more visually pleasing, let's say. So we have here our service and we have here our deployments. Or a pod. Let's just say there's one pod. And this is our service. Now the pod obviously might be part of a larger deployment. It might also not be. Now we want to connect to it. In this case, we have any IP address, and then we want to connect to it over port 3000. So if I port forward to the service, I will be localhost and then 3000 in this case. Now this is because I specified the port to be 3000. However, it has to know what port my pod runs on. And in this case, my pod here runs on the target port, or the container port in this case, container port, is 8080. That's the port that my application exposes, that my application connects to. Now, how did I configure that? That's done way before and within my Docker file. As you can see, I'm exposing port 8080, and also within my application itself, I'm using port 8080 to run my Express server on it. So when I specify target port 8080, it's literally, take it literal, the name, okay? I'm targeting port 8080. So let's add this here, target port, and this is 8080. Now this is the same as my container port in this case. This is literally targeting this port here. So what I do is I port forward to my localhost. My localhost will connect to my service port, in this case 3000, so localhost 3000. But the service knows that this is not the port where my application runs on, because I have a different target port, which is 8080, and it's forwarding it to my container port. And this is how I can connect through ClusterIP, in this case locally, through my application, to my application, because the service knows those endpoints. Now, if I would want to access my application, in this case, I'm accessing it through cluster access. This is only accessible from within the cluster. If I would want to make it accessible from the outside, I would use something like an ingress, for example. So I would have a different resource such as an ingress, which we're not going to look at in this case, that also has different port rules. It is, and so on, configured. And that way, this ingress will be able to connect to the service, even though the service is actually running within the cluster. So the ingress could also make it accessible through people who are unknown, such as users of our web application, right? So this is ClusterIP. Next, we have node port, which we're going to look at in the next video.